But let's turn our attention to Andy. Uh, let's open up the floor for any questions. Students, if you have questions, you can just go ahead and type them, or just go ahead and start speaking them, or you can raise your hand, with the emoji reactions. Um, I have a question to start things off.
That'd
Now,
be great.
yeah, well, I mean, I know that a lot of students, and I mean everyone deals with, performance anxiety and, like, the nervousness and all that stuff. I wanted to know if you could talk about a little bit about, like, the physical manifestations of it, like the heavy breathing, or the sweatiness, like, because I've certainly experienced, playing, like, when I first played that Brahms, clarinet trio on piano. I'm not a piano player, and I was, like, up there performing, and my fingers started getting all sweaty, and my hands start slipping off keys, and
Yeah,
I just wanted to know if you could just talk about how to manage that, just a little bit.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. And like in the video, I was talking a lot about, for me, the manifestation was a lot of like tightening up, my shoulders coming up, my upper body, my neck getting really tight, kind of scrunched up. Other manifestations were like difficulty breathing, a tightness in my breath. I think just because my muscles were getting tight, from the nervousness, all clammy or sweaty hands. I was a pianist too, as you guys know. That was my first thing.
Andy's
And
a very good piano player, by the
well,
way.
No,
thank
I didn't
you.
even know you played the oboe for like 2 years.
I know, isn't that crazy? Yeah, but so yeah, I've experienced the same symptoms that you're talking about as well, Kenny. And they're all totally the first thing to recognize is they're all normal and natural. As I said in the video, the issue really doesn't start with those symptoms. It's how we kind of interpret them and the story we start to build around those, and we start to dread them, and we start kind of creating this sort of toxic energy around all of those things. And the more you can just, like I said, sort of observe them and try to learn from them and get to know them, and reinterpret that kind of increase of energy as something that's meant to help you, something that's meant to make your performance more exciting, and give you it prevents you from coughing. Like, haven't you ever wondered why you never like sneeze in the middle of a performance or cough in the middle of a performance? Stuff that I do when I
Mhm.
practice all the time, but it never happens. And that's another one of the positive impacts that this sort of adrenaline has, is that it kind of prevents us from those sorts of things as well. So if you can reinterpret that process as something positive, then the symptoms start to either become less impactful, or they transform into something that feels very positive and very beneficial. Um, of course, depending on each instrument, it doesn't hurt to know tricks of the trade. I know pianists do lots of things, like they'll wear gloves before performances to help keep their hands warm and stuff like that. It's perfectly valid to have rituals and to have tricks to help you with the specificity of the nervousness. But I think as important, or maybe even more so, is this broader shift in perspective about those symptoms and about the root of those symptoms, and really seeing it in a better light. And I think that's what makes at least for me, that made a big difference. And I think I mentioned this in the video, but it's very important to reiterate this. It really is a process that can take many, many years to really start to see the fruits of it. And I know for young people, I was this way. I was impatient. I wanted to be amazing. I wanted to be great right away. And impatience is probably one of the most important things to sort of begin rooting yourself, getting, uh, unrooting from your being from a young age, just learning to be patient, learning to allow things to take however long they take, and being okay with that is very important as well. Does that answer?
Yeah, Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely it does. And one thing is, what I wanted to ask is, have you noticed that over time, like thinking about the symptoms this way, have they like started to like kind of go away a little bit? Like, have you noticed anything like just not having to deal with it as much because you are able to frame, in this way?
Yes, to a certain degree, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I've ever had a performance where I felt as 100% as kind of calm in my energy as I do like when I'm practicing. But I get closer and closer and closer to that over time. What I notice now is that I still feel the same kind of stirring up of energy before I perform and when I'm first walking out on stage about to play. Like there's a lot going on. My heart is still pounding for sure. Absolutely. Especially now in a position I'm playing concertos with orchestras and wind ensembles pretty regularly now. Like if you had asked me 15 years ago if I thought I was ever going to do something like that, I probably would have said, oh, yeah. But deep down inside, I would have thought, that's never going to happen. That's not me. Right. And now it's happening. And I
Hmm.
still feel like, my 20-year-old self. Heck, I feel like my 15-year-old self a lot of the time still. So I walk out on stage and my heart is pounding. And I'm thinking, why am I doing this? What possessed me to choose this life? And those are the thoughts. But now, because of all of these, the what I've been working on and the skills I've been developing and readjusting my point of view and all those things, I can work through that so much more quickly now, right? Usually
Hmm.
by the time I start playing, after I get past the first few notes, I've really already, my energy has started to really center itself and started to kind of focus in on this kind of thing. But that, like I said, it takes work, it takes time, it's a conscious process. At least it was for me. And like I said in the video, some people seem to have more of a knack for this, perhaps, or at least it appears from the outside they do. Maybe they're going through as much as I am. I don't know, but sometimes I watch people and it looks like it's just they're just going for a walk in the park, no big
Hmm.
deal. Whereas I'm sitting here like over years channeling this intense energy. But the most important thing is to realize that it's doable. Because there was a time when I thought, when I was in my early 20s, I thought I can't do this because every other performance was wildly different. There was no stability at all. And I thought, I don't know, I can't, this is too big. This is impossible. But it wasn't.
It's a great answer. Thank you.
I have, I have
Uh,
a question.
Yes.
So, okay, so now with this new landscape that we're approaching with the virtual, you know, platforms, so I wonder what your perspective or take is on the differences or the adjustments that one might have to make with virtual performances versus live. Because me personally, I actually find it more nerve wracking to videotape and do the virtual thing than a live performance. And I know the reason being is that it's permanent and it's not in real time. So, when you're performing in real time, you can forget things and keep going. But
Mm-hmm.
when it's recorded, there's a record. But
Well,
so any ideas or advice or suggestions on shifting the mindset to accommodate this new virtual reality of performances? Because I personally find it much more difficult than a live
absolutely.
performance.
Yeah. No, I totally understand. I think one of the most important things what you're asking is pointing to is how each of us are different. Each of us have different. Some people might find it much easier to perform when there isn't a live audience that they can see and hear and feel in a three-dimensional way, whereas other people might take a lot of comfort. They might feel much more comfortable when they can see the audience and they know the performance is ephemeral, it's not going to last. So this just points to how each one of us are very unique in our process, in our journey. For me personally, I find it less nerve-wracking to perform when I can't actually see the audience. So, but the important thing is here, all of the same sort of concepts apply that we've been talking about. We may have less experience with doing this sort of performing. This is newer to us. So it's probably stirring up for a lot of people a lot of maybe insecurities or fears or difficulties that they may not have really experienced in a while, because we've gotten so used to doing all our performances really in one context. So now some of us are maybe being sent back to sort of an earlier stage of our development by having to suddenly learn how to do this new thing and get good at it again. And maybe we thought that because we've performed so often in front of a live audience, it shouldn't be hard, right? So the first thing is to be forgiving of yourself. This is something that I think we forget to talk about a lot as teachers and performers. It's like we talk so much about the process and the steps to take and all that, but we don't really talk about step one is, it's all right if suddenly you're challenged by something you haven't been in a long time. It's all right if suddenly you don't do as well with something that you didn't struggle with. That's fine. Because most of us, when that happens, we start going into that judgmental place so quickly, right? I can't believe I screwed that up. I haven't done that in 15 years. What, that's where so many of us go with our thinking. So first is become aware of that thought. Forgive yourself for not being perfect, because nobody is. It's not a real thing, right? And then just go into the process of figuring out how to do that, how to perform in a virtual context and feel comfortable, and let yourself take as long with it as you want and practice doing it. For me, I would imagine it's probably pretty similar to making a recording. I know when I made my first CD, after I recorded everything on it, it was about a year and a half before I actually released the CD, because I was so terrified to put it out into the world. Like you said, it's permanent, right? So maybe just like taking baby steps, just recording yourself and putting it on Instagram or Facebook, just a little 10 or 15-second clip to share with your friends, just to kind of get into the flow of recording and posting, recording and presenting, recording and sharing. And if you do that regularly, imagine that performing in a virtual context would also gradually get a little bit easier, because it'd be very similar to what you've been doing all the time anyway. So familiarity, patience, forgiveness, excited curiosity, being appreciative for having a challenge. I think if those things are sort of the main flavors in your psyche, then I think you'd be able to absolutely topple a mountain. Does that answer it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think it's an adaptation for a lot of us.
Yeah.
So it's just this new approach, and I know, because a lot of people are going to be diving into this as
Right.
things change. So I think a lot of people are sort of frozen or stuck
Yeah.
because of not knowing what to do or how to approach this.
Well, and it's good. And what you're saying makes me also recognize the fact that we're all in the same boat, right? We're all in this together. So one would hope that everybody is going to be extremely generous with their support of one another in a time like this, not expecting each one of us to be able to adapt to a new situation and just do everything just as well or the same or whatever as we were before, and to give us all the space and time we need to adjust to this new. So I think the more you do that for yourself, the easier it becomes to do for others, and vice versa. The more you do that for others, the easier it becomes to do for yourself. This is something I've noticed with myself and a lot of my students is they're so kind and supportive to their peers, but they don't apply that same energy and mindset to themselves. And I'll hear them beat themselves up after a performance. And the first thing I say is, what you're saying to yourself right now, would you say that to your best friend after they came out after they came, backstage after a concert, would you be saying those exact words to your best friend after they performed? And let's say they didn't have their best performance. Let's say it was not great. But would you go up to them afterwards and tell them how awful they are and how they should just give up and blah, blah, blah? Of course not.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you treat yourself any worse than you would your best friend? So that's something that's helped me a lot, because I know that I have a tendency to be a perfectionist and beat myself up. And I always catch myself now and say, that is not what I would say to a loved one. I need
That
to
is
be
a
my own
great way
best
to
loved
think of
one,
that.
right?
That is a great way to think of that, and I've never
Yeah,
even considered that before. I mean,
yeah.
everyone knows that you are your own worst critic, like, So I mean, that is a great way to kind of spin that and, like, kind of get out of that, habit.
Yeah, and it's possible. I think some of us have an either or mentality. It is entirely possible to have very high standards and to aim for, the greatest level of playing you can possibly dream of, and still be absolutely supportive, forgiving, and loving to yourself. Those are not exclusive. And I think a lot of people kind of think you have to choose one or the other of those paths. But I say do both. That's certainly what I'm trying to do. And I fall to one side or the other sometimes. Sometimes I'm way too hard on myself, and other times I'm maybe too accepting of imperfection. I don't know. But the important thing is, because generally over the macro, I tend to nurture both of those paths, I'm able to do pretty well some of the time, maybe even much of the time, and yet also like be pretty calm about it and not live in a constant state of stress like so many other people with professional classical music careers seem to,
Mhm.
Hmm.
right?
Can I
So,
share? Can I share a short story? Actually, that's like just about this basically. So, Joseph Primavera, who I named Primavera Fund for, um, he came to my recital once, and I was playing some unaccompanied Bach, and it was Andre and Patricia was the C major sonata, which has a very very long fugue. And one of the unfortunate things that can happen is you can get caught in like an endless loop where you just kind of like go back to, instead of going on, you go back, and it's like a choose your own adventure story, right?
yeah.
So I got caught in this thing, and I just like, well, I guess I'm just gonna stop playing and go on to the third movement now, because oops, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I'm back, and also it was in front of like my idol. I mean, I
Mm.
idolized this man. He was like one of my most incredible mentors in ever. And so I'm backstage during intermission, which was right afterwards, and I am bawling my eyes out. And he comes back, and he was like 6'3" or something, big Italian man, and he would always shake his hand at you like this when he was telling you something important. He said, "Let me tell you something. The only people that doesn't happen to are people who make a practice of never performing in public.
Right.
If you're going to perform in public, things are going to happen. You made music, and that is the only thing that matters."
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's
I know,
that.
yeah. Like,
I couldn't have put it better myself.
and then he went on to tell me all these hilarious stories of, because he had been in the Philadelphia Orchestra, of like Heifetz and Pinchas Zuckerman and Rubinstein and Casals and all these people, like these giants of uh, music world, and just some hilarious fails that he experienced on stage with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
So
mean, that's we're human beings. It
right,
happens to everybody. And I think this is a really important point, because I remember my high school oboe teacher, who I only got to study with for 1 year, unfortunately. It was my senior year. I didn't kind of meet her until then, and she was absolutely spectacular. And one thing she said to me that really stuck with me, and at the time I didn't believe it or understand it, but it really stuck with me, is she said, you have to think of yourself on the level of, she said, Richard Woodhams, who's a very famous oboist from Philly.
Philadelphia
Uh,
Orchestra.
yep,
right. And And what she meant by that, and what you just pointed to, this sense of these musical giants, like these people, especially when we're younger, we tend to kind of put them up on a pedestal, which is not necessarily a bad thing to a certain degree. It only becomes a problem when you then assume, consciously or unconsciously, that you can never be on that level, right? And I used to do that myself. Even when she said that to me, my thought was, well, that's ridiculous. You know, that's never going to happen. But all of those people went through all the same steps you did. They didn't come out of the womb able to do that. So if you kind of drop that notion and just focus on your own path and your own journey without sort of these expectations of what you're going to be capable of or not, that's a limitation you're setting for yourself, whether you know it or not. So just drop that and just walk the path and explore and experiment, and who knows where you'll get. And one day you may suddenly realize that you are to the next generation what that idol you put on a pedestal was to you. And then you're like, wow, how did that happen? How did I get here? So, you know, I just want to make sure that you don't ever think to yourself that, oh, I love that person, they're so amazing, but that's just like this rare gift that is only accessible by a tiny percentage of people. Just drop that. You don't know what's possible if you do the work without that limit being set on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Any other questions, students? Sebastian, our resident oboe player, you
Uh,
got anything, buddy?
yes, I have a few. Can you hear me better now, by the way?
Yes, much better.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. I had the wrong microphone hooked up earlier. I have one question about performing and then one about reads. The question about performing is, how do you stop mistakes from spiraling out of control, especially when you don't have the time to pause and think?
Well, yeah, that's definitely a wonderful question, and you know, it touches on everything we've been talking about. There's no easy answer to that question, but the most truthful answer I really think is the quality of your preparation. And as you saw in the video, the preparation, I think why that isn't always enough of an answer for people is because I think we're sometimes a little limited in terms of what we even imagine preparation to be. So please understand, when I say preparation, I'm not talking about learning the piece or the pieces. That's a part of it. That is definitely a part of it, but it's just a part of a much larger kind of mosaic. So the preparation of your fundamentals, right? Just like I was talking about in the video, the more your fundamentals are the right balance of strength and fluidity, right, and more effortless they are, then the more capable you will be of kind of regathering your energy, physical and mental, in the midst of a performance when something doesn't go the way you expected, right? The less likely it will be to cause an irreversible spiral if you have a system of playing that is really grounded and really healthy. Also, like I said, the mind part of it too. That's another big part of this preparation with a capital P. If you haven't done any of the mind work, then you make a mistake in a performance, and what's the first thing your mind's going to do? Start whipping yourself, right? It's going to start saying, I can't believe you did that. Oh my gosh. And then all of a sudden you're in the past and the performance is still going. So you're no longer kind of synced up with the moment. So in order to be able to stay in the moment, no matter what happens, you have to develop this space around your thought. That's what I was talking about in the performance, objective awareness. It's another way of just talking about space. Most of us identify so deeply with our thoughts that there's no space around them. So the second that they run in a direction we don't want them to go, we have no choice but to follow. But if you have space around those thoughts, you can let them run in whatever direction they want, and you're immovable. So mental preparation, day to day, developing objective awareness, preparing your music to an unbelievable degree. I believe in over preparation. When I have to perform, last year I did the Legacy Concerto by Oscar Navarro, which is an extremely difficult piece for oboe. By far, probably the most technically challenging piece I've ever played. I started working on it about 18 months ahead of time. And I really worked on it incredibly carefully and thoughtfully for several months. I probably over prepared, and yet I still felt like I just barely was able to perform it kind of the way I wanted to. So prepare so thoroughly that if, if somebody stands up during the performance and shoots a bow and arrow, into the sky, you're like not going to be distracted by that. And then lastly, the body work, developing a system of playing that is free and fluid and effortless. And if you do all of that, then I'm not saying you're not going to make a mistake, but what I am saying is that that mistake is less likely to cause you to fall off the train, so to speak.
Can I just bring up something that helps me, like kind of in that moment of spiraling out of control? Because I've certainly
Yeah,
felt that as a brass player and especially on the piano too. As a brass player or really any musician, I feel like when you're like kind of starting that spiral out of control feeling, what's going on in my brain is I'm thinking, oh God, like this hard thing is coming up, like, and I'm starting to remember all the times in the practice room that it did not go well. And then what helps me is like, I mean, I just realized, hey, I can do this. Like I'm here, we're here right now. I can do it. Like I've done it many times, and you start like really remembering those times, and then next thing you know, you're all like the piece is happening, like you're in the
right.
moment,
Well,
and
and
it's
that sounds to me like you've done some of the mind work.
yeah.
I mean, if you're capable in that moment of shifting things to a more positive direction, that's really all it takes. And I didn't mention this because it's kind of seems obvious to me, but I think maybe it's not always obvious. And there's a reason why I called the video The Art of Performance. Performing is its own art form, independent of one's playing and practice in a way, right? You can be an amazing practicer, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to get up on stage consistently and perform at a high level. So remember to practice performing as well, Sebastian. So how do we practice performing? Well, like I said in the video, perform for people. Go ask your friends to come over, play for your family, go play for a nursing home, go play at a hospital, make recordings and send them to your teachers. Recording is not exactly the same as performing, but for me, it puts me in a somewhat similar mind state. I have more pressure on myself when I record something than I do when I'm just practicing. So that can also be helpful. So just get out there and perform as much as you can. And I think the spiraling will also be less likely to happen because you'll just be more comfortable with that process in general.
Yeah, that's great.
So I'm dying to hear the Reed question.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you. That was excellent. And second, what was the piece that you mentioned?
Oh, the Legacy Concerto by Oscar Navarro. Yeah, it's a great piece, pretty recent composition. It was written for Ramon Ortega, who's this phenomenal Spanish oboist. There's a great video on YouTube of him playing it with a wind ensemble in Spain. It's really good. I think you'll like it a lot, Sebastian.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I actually have a second question, or two questions about reads now. But the first is, what goals should I have when making reads, both in terms of the amount of time I'm spending doing so and what I should hope to have at the end?
Yeah, I mean, so this question I could probably take easily an hour or two to really answer as thoroughly as I'd like. So I obviously am not going to do that. So I'll try to make it as quick as possible. So first of all, it's totally great to set goals. It's fantastic to set, day-to-day goals, week to week, month to month, absolutely. But I also find it to be very useful to kind of go into something only with a complete curiosity about the process itself and not necessarily having an expectation of having anything to show for it at the end. Because let me tell you, Sebastian, you're going to sit down and make reads many times in your life and not have anything to show for it at the end of an hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. That's a common thing. And just to kind of accept that and get used to that, while also be willing to set goals. So what I think you need to do, Sebastian, is what feels right and good to you. I like to say I'm going to make 2 reads every day. And so that's how I kind of take care of the bare bones skeleton of a structure in my read making. Now, there are days where I do more than that. There are some days where I don't quite have the time to do that. But normally I stick pretty truly to that structure. So what that means is on any given day, I will soak up 2 pieces of gouge cane. I will shape them. I will wrap them. I'll scrape them to the point to they're vibrating and crowing a relatively stable C. They're probably not, ready to be performed on stage yet. In fact, I'm not aiming for that. I just want to get them sort of an archetype, a nice, well-made beginning of a read. I call it a day 1 read. And then I'll take out 2 reads from the day before and start refining them. So I'm making 2 new reads and potentially oftentimes then working on 1 or 2 of the reads I made before to try to finish them. And if you do something like that regularly enough over time, you're going to start noticing more consistency in your results for sure. Now, for some people, they don't like to set a goal of making 2 reads or 1 read a day or 5 reads a week or whatever it is. They like to do a time chunk. So they say, I'm going to sit down and do 2 hours of read making every day or 1 hour of read making every day, whatever that looks like for you. That's a totally reasonable sort of goal to set as well. The important thing, one way or the other, Sebastian, is that there is consistency. The key to being a great read maker is not making reads for 3 hours one day and then not doing it at all for 2 days and then doing it for 4 hours and then not doing it for 5. You need to just do it every day. If you want to start getting good at read making, you got to sit down at the desk every day and chip away at it. It's real. Not saying you can never take a day off, of course, and sometimes that's very healthy. Sometimes once in a while, it's great to take a week off. But generally speaking, you want to just make a pact with yourself. You're going to put some time into it every single day. And all of the same strategies I talked about in the video with performing apply to read making too. It is so easy to unconsciously go to a toxic, dark place in your thought when you're making reads. It is as easy as breathing. And I'm not saying there's anything ultimately wrong with that other than you're setting pathways into your consciousness, into your mind, your soul, your heart, whatever you want to call it. You're creating pathways, and eventually those thoughts kind of create a toxic dynamic in your relationship with read making, and it can start to become something you really don't like, you really dread, or at best you tolerate it. And you know it's something you have to do to get to what you really want to do. Well, let me tell you, if you can learn to fall in love with read making, then I guarantee you're going to have a much better shot of becoming a fantastic oboist.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful.
Read making is like, you have to be like a very, very patient, special personality to deal with
Yes,
that.
a lovely personality.
Oh my God. Oh, it's so hard. Imagine having to make your own bow like every time. Yeah,
It's tough. It's tough, and it teaches you to let go. In fact, I think it's a really deep sort of art in a way, because reads, they come and go like that. And you can, just in the past week, I've had at least 3 occasions where I had a fantastic read that I was really, and I just needed a tiny bit of work, and I, poured over it for an hour, just trying to do microcosmic shifts to the point where I ended up destroying it. And it is heartbreaking every time that happens, but you just have to learn to let it go and just, all right, try again. So it teaches you how to not cling to things. I'll tell you that much. And it can be very useful for people in that way. But yeah, oboe players do tend to be a slightly more high-strung bunch.
Mhm.
I think I might be a bit of an anomaly in the oboe
Yeah,
world.
yeah, I would say that. Is that why you switched to viola, Andre? Is it because you were not high strung? If you guys remember, Andre did start off as an oboist.
Oh, I thought you meant from violin. Oh,
No.
Audrey, I
No.
think I did know that and forgot that about you. Oh, It was the
That's great.
reed making, wasn't it?
It was the injuries.
Oh
Mm.
no.
I
Oh,
was
that's
a little too adventurous with the reed knife.
you're not good with sharp
You
objects.
know?
No,
A nice blunt viola will do. That's great.
exactly.
All right. So, kids, you guys got any more questions? Christopher, Serrano, Patricia?
I actually have a quick question on remaking. Like, what materials do you use to make it, and where do you find them?
So the reeds themselves is a type of grass, actually. It's cane. It looks like bamboo, but it's actually kind of grass. And it grows in a lot of places, but we tend to buy the cane we use as oboe players mostly from France and Italy. And there's a lot of different kind of stores around the country that specialize in reed making equipment and cane and all of that we most of us order our cane from. And then in addition to the cane, there's a series of tools you need that are okay. There's a series of tools that you need in order to process the cane and make the reeds. You need equipment that gouges the cane, that cuts it to the right length. You need equipment to tie the cane onto what's called a staple. And you need knives and sharpening equipment for the scraping. And all of that stuff you can also get at these stores that specialize in reed making equipment for oboe players. Are you an oboist?
No, I'm a violinist.
But are you curious about reed making?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've had some good friends that are not oboists of all different kinds of instruments that just seem to have a real curiosity about it and have sat and watched me do it. And invariably, after one session of watching me do it, they immediately say, "Thank God I don't have to do that."
I mean,
And
you guys have like really good patience to just like
Yeah.
sit here and just make sure like this read is perfect. Because
Yeah.
for my
It's-
own instrument, I don't think I'll be able to handle like the time for me just to make like sample my own bow or my own instrument. So it's
yeah,
really
it's
amazing how much patience you always have to just make something that's super vital to your instrument.
That's right. And this, I think this is kind of why certain personalities tend to be attracted to certain instruments. I do think that it takes a particular facet of a personality to have the interest and desire to do reed making, because honestly, I probably spend more time making reeds than I do actually play. I'm
Wow.
quite sure of that, actually.
Wow.
So, and it's a very tiny art form. You are dealing with things on the level of hundreds of a millimeter, so it requires a microscopic level of focus to do it, particularly at a high level. So
I do
yeah,
have
you're
a quick question. I don't know how quick it is, but what is it about the oboe that makes it so you can't just buy reeds? Like you can't buy like a box of reeds, like a clarinetist or or even
well, you
trumpet
could.
player. Just go buy a mouthpiece. Like it's
Well, you can technically, you absolutely can buy reeds. And certainly when an oboist is starting out and in the first few years, perhaps if they, most of the time, oboists don't start learning how to make reeds until well into high school. And that's usually really the more serious ones. Um, but, uh, but yeah, you can buy reeds. The reason why you don't do that once you get to a certain more maybe advanced level and then into professional level is because reeds are very unique. Remember, reeds are a stand-in for the vocal cords. They function
yeah.
in the same way as the vocal cords. And so everybody has a different anatomy. Everybody has a different concept of a beautiful sound. Everybody likes a different feeling to their reeds, right? Some reeds have more to blow against, some are much more free blowing, some tend to be more up to pitch, some to be a little more, tend to be more saggy and flat. I mean, there's as many different types of reeds as there are oboe players. So to really be playing consistently and comfortably at a high level, you have to really make your own reeds for the most part.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it is. There are a couple of people out there that maybe don't have the interest or time anymore, and they just kind of buy reeds from a good friend that makes similar enough reeds, but that's very rare.
Hmm.
It's like
Oh
the
wow.
reed, you're the reed dealer.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
reed dealer.
Yeah, the good ones
Nobody
are hard
knows.
to
Nobody
find.
knows their
Oh
location.
my.
The
No,
good
there are
ones,
people
yeah, yeah.
who
I
do
remember
have. They
buying.
sell reeds.
Oh my.
Yeah, I remember buying reeds in that back alley. Yeah, Andre,
Sorry.
Andre.
Oh my God.
Too soon.
Hilarious.
Sorry.
Oh, I
Hilarious.
loved it.
I love you guys. If there's no more questions, I think we should wrap it up. Any more
Absolutely.
questions from the kids? Serrano, got one? Oh,
Oh
Christopher
wow,
will be next.
nice.
I just have a little question about mantras. What's your opinion on mantras in for nervousness?
Well, I think that they can be an extremely useful tool for many people. Well, certainly some people, if not many people. But just to remember that it is just a tool at the end of the day. Anything can become dangerous if we tend to over rely on it, right? Remember how I said earlier that it's all right to have rituals like pianists that wear gloves before they perform to keep their hands warm, stuff like that. That kind of serves a similar function in a way to speaking mantras. But what's going to happen if you don't have the gloves one day? What's going to happen if you get called to perform unexpectedly or something goes missing? Now, of course, I'm not saying you can lose your mantras, but I'm just saying that it can be dangerous to start a narrative consciously or unconsciously that if I don't do this, if I don't speak my mantras 150 times 12.6 minutes before the performance, then I will not perform at my highest level. That's when it becomes problematic. So by all means do it and develop those tools, but also be willing, utterly capable and willing to let them go, to not over rely. Okay.
Thank you.
And Chris, you're welcome. Chris had his
Christopher.
hand up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I was actually reading, I don't remember what it was, but it was like stuff about the oboe and how, some people can actually pass out, like, by playing it because the small, air that is needed. My question was basically, like, why is that? Is it because, like, their improper blowing technique or?
Yes, absolutely, Chris. And let me first just say, passing out from playing the oboe is extraordinarily rare. I've never seen it happen, actually. It might be a little bit one of those urban legends. I have seen a couple of students in my many, many years of teaching who have gotten a little like lightheaded and a little bit like you could tell their skin, their face changed color, kind of like it got sort of gray and they needed to sit down. But that's the most extreme thing I've ever seen in my many, many years doing this. So it's not something one really needs to worry about. But invariably a problem like that would come from one of a few things: a reed being too resistant or not functioning. I mean, this would be have to be a reed that's way outside of a level of functionality that's reasonable, or being way too tight when you play, having too much tension. I've noticed that when it has happened, it's usually happened with students who are very petite, like very, very, very slender, and sometimes with students that didn't eat or tend to not eat much. So there is a correlation between that getting lightheaded and tired with maybe not having enough nourishment and sustenance in you. So I do think physical health is generally a good thing. I'm not saying that. I mean, some oboe players I've heard say you have to be like in amazing physical health to play the oboe. That's not true. I've seen a lot of great players in a huge spectrum of physical levels of health. So, but I do think, making sure you've eaten enough and generally take decent care of yourself is probably helpful. And if you do that and you play on reeds that are relatively functioning and don't play in an incredibly tight manner, then you will never have to worry about anything like
Okay, thank you.
that. You're welcome.
I will say Christopher's a flute player, and Christopher, I think we brought this up in a different master class about the different resistances. Oboe is like all resistance. It feels like there's something holding your air back, like you got to overcome that. Unlike
Yeah.
the flute, which is like zero resistance whatsoever, and
Yeah,
the
you have
brass
to
is,
like create resistance as a flute player. You have to
yeah,
like kind of create it internally. Whereas oboe, it's built in for. So we have to do the opposite. We have to learn how to kind of create space and freedom and flexibility around that resistance. So yeah, they're kind of opposites from one another in a certain way, for sure.
yeah, absolutely. Good question. And Sebastian, you want to have the last question there?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I frequently get headaches, and when they're really bad, I can't play the oboe. What should I do on those days?
Well, I mean, without delving into anything overly personal, I assume perhaps that you've kind of talked to somebody about that, a specialist or a doctor or somebody, just to maybe ascertain what the source of those might be. Is that, have you done that?
Yeah, but they never really have any answers. It's just like, that sucks.
Okay, well, then, for the sake of the conversation, let's assume that this is just going to be something you have to deal with for the rest of your life. There's no way to mitigate it, and taking Advil doesn't help. Let's just assume that for me to answer this question. Well, first and foremost, if the headache is severe enough that it really feels uncomfortable to play, then I think it's important that you not play. Like, I don't think it's smart to push through pain as a player. I generally believe in not doing that. But the first thing I would do is analyze, is my setup contributing to this at all? Is there anything in my setup I can do to mitigate this or lessen this? Like, for example, are my reeds too resistant? I know students who maybe have mild headaches by nature, but they get exacerbated by playing on resistant reeds. So that's not going to be very helpful. You need to make sure everything in your setup is conducive to not contributing to whatever the issue might be. So making sure your reeds are free blowing enough and stable and don't require a lot of force and muscle to play. Make sure your body, I mean, everything I said in the video would be useful for dealing with something like this. And also, once again, there's the mind body connection, right? If you're constantly stressed and worried about this, that's probably going to contribute. It creates a vicious circle, kind of. So, doing your best to just investigate this as objectively and non-judgmentally as possible. Read books, talk to specialists, talk to other musicians. I'm sure there are many, many musicians that have had to deal with something like that. Seek out information, approach it like a puzzle to be solved. Try to not be too worried or stressed about it, and make sure your equipment and your fundamentals are helping you create an effortless way of playing. That's really about all you can do.
Great, thank you.
You're very welcome, Sebastian.
Awesome. Way to wrap things up. Again, thank you so much, Andy. I look forward to actually having you in person at some
Me
point
too.
when
Me
we're
too.
actually COVID free. That would be lovely.
Yes. I would love to do that. Can I stay at your place?
Absolutely. Totally.
Terrific.
Totally.
Oh, that's
Party.
great. Well, thank you all. It's been a pleasure.